guys, it's Reagan and welcome back to another video. Today's video is a fun one because we're going to be going through a rather notorious list of nominees. That's right, friends. I'm going to be going through every single book I've read nominated for a Goodreads Choice Award and if I think it's worth the read or not. If you're not familiar, the Goodreads Choice Awards is a yearly compilation of releases from this year organized by genre where readers can vote on their personal favorite, and before the end of the year, winners are picked by genre. It's very much sort of known as a popularity contest. That being said though, the lists have always sort of varied in quality over the years, but I will say this year, I'm actually quite pleased with a lot of the nominees, at least for the genres that I read most. The majority of the books I'm going to be chatting about today are all from the fantasy category and romantasy category as well. So without further ado, let's go ahead and dive right in. I am honestly impressed with the fantasy category this year. Obviously, there are a few books that I would have also included, but for the most part, I really liked a lot of the books that were nominated. Starting off, we have the Raven Scholar, which I would 100% recommend, and in fact feel like it's kind of underrated. So I was surprised but thrilled to see it nominated. This is a super plot-forward first book to a new fantasy series that I feel like so many people would enjoy. It combines lots of different plot elements from a murder mystery to a trial for the throne. It also has wonderfully written characters and just a very engrossing plot. It's set in a fantasy world where every generation there is a competition for the throne. Individuals from each different political house basically vie for the opportunity to rule the realm. This system has sort of helped keep political violence at bay, but at the beginning of this book we're introduced to our main character, who is the high scholar of the current emperor. She's also a raven, which is a political house known for their scholarly abilities. She also has sort of achieved her rank through merit, so she doesn't have a lot of close connections, and politically she's very much ostracized. At the beginning of this book, this competition for the throne is about to kick off, but before it begins, a murder happens, resulting in our main character having to solve this murder by investigating all these different political houses. She's also somehow roped into participating in the competition itself, and let's just say the plot balloons in so many different directions. It's so entertaining. There is quite literally a murder investigation with clues and mysteries to unlock. There's also all these different competitions at play between the different individuals from the houses. There's also wonderful and complex character moments. Honestly, I loved this first installment so much. I can't wait for book 2. This is for sure a book I would recommend. Next, we have Watermoon. This is a fantasy release I would say maybe read depending on your personal preferences for stories and inputs. This is a more romance-forward fantasy story. It also has a very dreamlike and beautiful landscape and setting. It very much reminds me of a Ghibli film, but it also has an intangible quality to the plot, characters, and story that I feel like you're either going to be vibing with and really enjoying, or you're going to feel like it's underdeveloped. So depending on your personal preferences, I would just keep that in mind reading this book. The story opens in a magical pawn shop where basically individuals can come and sell their deepest regrets. Our main character is the daughter of the owner of this pawn shop, but at the beginning of the story, her father goes missing. And when a new customer comes in, they begin to go on a journey together through this dreamlike world to try to find her missing father. Romance, understanding, and adventure begin to bloom from there. The strengths of the story are definitely the writing style and the setting. I don't mind murky plots, but if you like more tangible stories, this really might not be for you, but I do think it was quite beautiful. So again, this is a maybe. The next book is The River Has Roots. This is a short story that I absolutely ate up. The writing style and storytelling of this was just immaculate, and it is also a perfect encapsulation of what I love in fantasy stories. This is a story of two sisters, and while they're very much opposites in many ways, there's one thing they both have in common, and that is the love they have for each other. These two sisters were raised in a magical tree grove on sort of the border between the human and fae realm, and their families had the responsibility for generations sort of sing to the trees and protect the magic in the area. And after tragedy occurs within this family, one sister will do anything to help the other. This story reads very much like a ballad. In fact, if you haven't picked it up, I highly recommend listening to the audiobook experience of this. It has such a stunning cadence to it, the writing style, the vibe. It has this classic fairy tale vibe to it, which obviously matches the fae magic, the fae realm. It's very much a parable on love and betrayal and family, and it's truly a stunning book and story. I loved this immensely. If you love classic fairy tales, this is definitely worth a pickup. Even if you don't typically read fantasy, this is stunning. Then we have Wind and Truth by Brandon Sanderson. This came out in 2024, so I was actually a little surprised to see it on the list, but I guess technically it came out after the announcement of last year's nominees, so I guess you could say it makes sense it's here. This, of course, is the final book of the first sequence of the Stormlight Archive, which is currently one of the most popular epic fantasy series that is currently being released. I have been a longtime fan of the Stormlight Archives. It's definitely a commitment, both in the length of this series, but also in the larger Cosmere that it exists in. For the most part, I have really loved every installment of the Stormlight Archive so far. I will say the fifth installment, which does sort of tee up the next sequence of the series, is maybe my least favorite of the book so far. It was very good and had a lot of elements that I did really enjoy, and for such a long book, I did read it still quite quickly. But there is definitely elements to the writing style and some of the plot movements I personally wasn't fully sold on, which definitely surprised me. This book is, I don't know if I could say yes, no, maybe. I mean, obviously, if you're a fan of Brandon Sanderson and the Stormlight Archive, you're going to want to read this book. While the fifth book was my least favorite installment, I still definitely recommended it. So yes, I do think the Stormlight Archives is worth the read and pick up, though it is very much a commitment. Everyone is like over 1,000 pages. It's an epic fantasy world full of lots of characters, plot movements, danger at an epic scale. I mean, it's hard to describe because truly so much happens over the expanse of this series. Obviously, we have a long wait now until book 6, so maybe it's time for a reread. But yes, I recommend the Stormlight Archives. Was this fifth book my favorite? No. Then we have A Drop of Corruption by Robert Jackson Bennett. This series I feel like everyone should read. Whether you read fantasy, whether you're more of a literary fiction or prefer other genres, this is a fantasy series I just feel like everyone would enjoy, and that is because it's the perfect blend of inputs. This is an episodic Sherlock Holmes closed-door murder mystery story set in a fascinating fantasy world with such great characters and a perfect example of fantasy inputs influencing mystery plot lines in such a unique and original way. Every book centers a new mystery, but we also get wonderful character arcs for our main characters. It's just a perfect blend of things, and it's for sure one of my favorite books I've read this year. It was a wonderful second installment, but this is a series introducing us to our main characters, Din and Anna. Din, our main character, has had some body modifications that has allowed him to have a photographic memory. This means for a job he works alongside a very talented detective named Anna, but Anna is very unusual, very difficult, and very hard to please or anticipate. But she's also a genius and very good at like unlocking mysteries. Again, very much giving Watson and Sherlock. The series itself is set in a fascinating fantasy world that I sort of describe as like Attack on Titan meets Godzilla. It has a very organic and scientific leaning magic system. Everything about it is fascinating, but it also has a lot of heart and wonderful character moments, and each book has its own central mystery to follow, so you have the satisfaction of opening and closing a mystery book over book. I could read a million books following these characters. Yes, you should absolutely read this. I'm telling you, the fantasy nominees were quite strong this year. Next we have Bury Our Bones in the Midnight Soil by V.E. Schwab. I also loved this. I've read a lot of V.E. Schwab over the years, and some of her books I've really loved, some of them I've found to be just okay. This one absolutely hit it out of the park for me. It was the most vampire book I've read in a while, and it was also exactly what I wanted from this genre. If you love the vibes of like Interview with a Vampire, this is the book for you. Sumptuous, gothic, violent, mesmerizing in all of the best ways, full of gray morality, fascinating characters, and of course, vampires. This is a story that follows 3 women in 3 different periods of history, and we follow their stories and their journey with becoming a vampire, and also how their fates and lives become intertwined with each other. It is intoxicating. So good. Next we have Hemlock and Silver by T. Kingfisher, another one of my favorite authors. And for this, I would say maybe. And it's not because I personally didn't enjoy it, because I did, but I would say it's not my favorite of her books, and I would really pick this up if you're looking for like a cozy fantasy story, because this is a really well-balanced sort of cozy leaning fantasy story. But if you want something with a little more intensity, I wouldn't say this is the story for you. For me, Hemlock and Silver has a great mix of like lovable characters, romance, a charming charming, kind of cozy leaning story with stakes and some other interesting components to it. This is a dark fairy tale reimagining of the story of Snow White. We follow our main character, who's an apothecary who heals by way of poison. And at the beginning of the story, the king of the realm beseeches her to help him figure out what is going on with his daughter because he is fearing that she's being poisoned. She goes to the capital of the realm, gets wrapped up in lots of courtly politics and a larger mystery surrounding his daughter Snow. Things get complicated. She has companions who help. She has to deal with various enemies. It also sort of gives like medical mystery in a way that was pretty entertaining. I enjoyed this book. If you're looking for something that is cute and charming, this could be a good pickup. Then we have The Devils by Joe Abercrombie, another wonderful release from this year and one I would highly, highly, highly recommend. This is kind of like Joe Abercrombie's take on like a cozy quest-centric fantasy story, meaning it's still absolutely gory, bloody, and devastating, but it has an endearing quality to it that kind of brings the whole thing together in a really charming way. The story opens with our main character, who is a priest and not a very good one, and he's basically promoted to oversee this like new congregation of individuals who are all like evil and lost causes. We have one who is a vampire, another who's a werewolf, one is a pirate, one is an elf who can turn invisible, one is a necromancer, and lastly a street urchin who is maybe the lost heir to a powerful throne. And they basically all begin to travel with each other to bring this lost heir to her kingdom. And a bunch of stuff begins to happen from there. It has wonderful character dynamics, crazy plot action, really combining well with like religious horror, really hilarious character arcs, but again, like a level of intensity you would still expect from Joe Abercrombie, but also endearing. I loved it. I loved it so much. Then we have Red City by Marie Lu. This was a recent read for me, but wow, did it absolutely blow my expectations out of the water. I was obsessed with this book. This was so plot forward and intoxicating. This is an urban fantasy story set in a reimagined Los Angeles. Here the world is very much similar to ours, but there's one key difference, and that is alchemy exists. And also in this world, there are very powerful crime syndicates who use the power of alchemy to basically maintain power, control governments, make lots and lots of money, and they primarily do this through a substance called sand, which can be consumed to kind of make you like the best version of yourself. Two main characters meet in childhood, and they quickly become best friends, understanding each other like very deeply in a way that like forms a lifelong friendship happening in childhood. But due to a variety of events, they find themselves involved with these crime syndicates, but on opposite sides of this Cold War, which is heating up once again by the beginning of this book. This story is so intense. The author like perfectly encapsulated the mystique of these syndicates, the gloss, the intrigue, the intensity, the danger of working for these organizations. The relationship dynamics between our two main characters is amazing. The story itself also very much has stakes. It's intense, and the moral quandaries our characters have to walk are fascinating. I really enjoyed book one. It absolutely hooked me. I cannot wait for the next installment. It truly had it all. Alrighty, moving on now to the final book from the traditional fantasy category, and that is The Strength of the Few by James Islington. Full transparency, I am currently reading this. I've not completed it yet, but what I have read so far, excellent. What I've read so far in relation to the continuation of the series from The Will of the Many, a book I read a couple years ago and absolutely loved, really excellent. But obviously take my review with a grain of salt because I do still need to finish it. But so far, so excellent. This is a Roman-inspired fantasy story that's set in a world where everyone is sort of organized by this hierarchy, literally from a society point of view, but also in their magic system where everyone has to give over their will to the empire. The higher you are up on this hierarchy, the more will you have access to, the more powerful you are. Our main character Viz will do anything to not give his will over to the empire, but also gains the attention of some powerful people in the government. Now he finds himself a spy and attending this very difficult military academy, and things get complicated quickly. Book two, so good. Such interesting like structural decisions, immediately carrying on the plot from book one. I'm very fascinated in all the directions the plot has decided to go as a continuation of the story. So I've decided I'm confident enough to include it, but obviously, technically we'll see. Alrighty, moving on now to the romantasy category where I have read 3 of the nominees. The first book I was a little surprised to see in romantasy, but I suppose I understand because it is very romance forward. Also one of the best books I've read this year, and that is Wild Reverence by Rebecca Ross. My favorite Rebecca Ross so far. It was perfect. It was so perfect. The yearning, the storytelling, the intricate layering of the different perspectives, the timeline of the book, it was literally so perfect. This story follows our main character Matilda, who is a god, and she has lived in the underrealm with her mother her entire life. She herself is not a very powerful god, so she has to be very careful in terms of who she interacts with because the world of the gods are very, very cutthroat. She does have the special ability, though, to travel between realms, both the underrealm, the upper realm, and of course the human realm. She also begins to consume the dreams of a young boy who is a human, and they become rather acquainted with each other early on in their life. Later on, they meet as adults, and what basically is told to us feels like a great epic of love. Like, it perfectly captures the story of like a godly tale. It feels like a parable. There's so many lessons to glean from it and to learn, but like the human emotions of love, loss, sacrifice, fear are also very much a part of the story. I also feel like Rebecca Ross did such a fantastic job crafting her godly characters. They feel very distinct and different from humans, and just like the whole aesthetic of this book, perfect. Like, literally so perfect. Less perfect was The Night and the Moth by Rachel Gillig. This is a book that I'm kind of two minds about. Vibe-wise, setting-wise, idea-wise, I really liked. Execution just didn't quite match the setting the author put the book in, where I felt like Wild Reverence's writing style, dialogue, character interactions matched the medieval setting of the story. The Night and the Moth, I feel like sort of struggled and had very like modern romantic dialogue in a, again, medieval setting that sort of made me feel a little distracted as I was going along. This is giving like Ophelia and Hamlet vibes. We follow our main character Sybil, who is a prophet. She has been raised in this like remote monastery with her sisters her entire life. At the beginning of the story, an envoy containing a king who's looking to get a picture of his fate arrives, and in his envoy there's also a knight who is obviously hot. Due to a variety of circumstances, Sybil kind of joins up with this envoy to help try to get answers regarding her sisters. Overall, while I enjoyed the aesthetics of the story, the vibe of the story, especially in the beginning, I found the plot to ultimately be rather conventional and predictable for the majority of the book. I also feel like the aesthetics, which I loved so much at the beginning, sort of fell off about halfway through. I am unsure if I'm going to continue on. This was personally just okay for me, but I'm obviously in the minority with that one. This book is very popular. I also read A Witch's Guide to Magical Innkeeping, which is a cozy fantasy romance, which again, if you like cozy fantasy romance, read this. If you're not a fan of that genre, don't read this. This is a continuation of the very secret society of irregular witches. I will say, as a follow-up to that book, I didn't like it quite as much as the first one, but it still was a very enjoyable read, and it was also a very easy read and kind of worked as a great palate cleanser. This follows our main character who runs a magical inn with her great aunt. Before the start of the story, though, she lost her powers, which she has been struggling to sort of regain. This book very much centers like found family. There's a romantic element. There's like a larger lesson to be learned about acceptance and fighting back against like abusive family, which overall I appreciated. If you want something that feels like a warm hug, pick this up. And then the last two books are both from the horror category. They're both like fantasy horror reads, so I feel like they fit in with the overall theme of this video. The first is The Bewitching by Silvia Moreno Garcia, and I really liked this. If you want something creepy, witchy, a little bit disturbing, this is the book for you. This is a multi-generational witch tale that layers the stories of 3 different women through time as they're all dealing with their own type of haunting. The first main character we're introduced to is Minerva, and she's currently getting her PhD in the 90s at a very prestigious East Coast university. Her focus and thesis is on one specific horror writer who attended her same university in the 50s, and she comes across an unexpected manuscript of this writer recounting something very disturbing happening to her close friend at the time. And the more our main character reads the story, something similar begins to happen to her in present day. And then lastly, we also get a story of Minerva's great-grandmother who also experienced a similar haunting in her past. And let me just say, decisions are made in this book that I deeply respect. It was also very foreboding, very creepy. I was kind of on the edge of my seat the entire time. I also really appreciated the author's interpretation of like witches and magic and haunting. Overall, all. I found it to be a creepy book. And then the very last book is The Possession of Alba Diaz by Isabel Cañas. Obviously, I also love Isabel Cañas, and this new release was at the top of my TBR for the fall season, and I would also recommend it, especially if you love horror. This author perfectly combines elements of like horror, melodrama, romance, and also expertly weaves in historical settings to inform her horror plotline in a way that I really enjoy. This story is set in the New World, and we follow our main character, who is the adopted daughter of a very wealthy merchant family. At the beginning of this book, she gets engaged to her best friend, and they travel to her fiance's silver mine, and there's something living in that mine basically possesses our main character, and everything sort of spirals from there. This book is creepy, disturbing, very, very fast paced. Again, I also deeply appreciate the historical influences of the story. It was hard to put down, and I also loved the structural storytelling of it. I don't really want to say more than that because of spoilers, but it was very gripping. Alrighty guys, those are all of the books I've read nominated for a Fantasy Goodreads Choice Award. Let me know down below some books you've read this year that you've really enjoyed, as I would love to know, and I will see you guys soon with another video soon. Goodbye!